Hi, this is Brendan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and I'm here with Jim Pinto, and we're going to be talking about heavy metal for our third episode of Metal Workshop, and we're continuing the discussion of what metal is exactly. We discovered kind of a long topic, and we left out a lot of key things in the first discussion we had on it. So we're going to begin with the question today of, is Alice in Chains heavy metal?
I don't know if we left anything out, but we talked for so long, we would have gone hoarse if we'd kept going.
I agree. And actually, I was thinking of the second discussion where me and Pete were specifically talking about the definition of heavy metal, and we left out obvious things like guitar, like just things that are the really basic parts of the definition.
Yeah, they're so obvious.
Yeah.
I think the power chord has to be an integral part of metal versus the open chord, which you see in rock and roll, by the way. So if you're going to talk guitars, you have to incorporate that conversation. But we're talking about Alice in Chains.
Yeah, and we should bring up that, but I want to talk about power chords and open chords later, because that's a really important distinction, and that's something that gets really muddy, too. So I'll add that to the discussion list.
It does get really muddy, because there's some guys that are playing two strings at a time when they're doing a power chord. And there's guys just playing one, and so on. And then you've got Dave Mustaine, who's doing open chords for metal, but he's making it work. So it's a big stew. It's tough.
It's tricky.
Jane's answer is long, Brendan, and I apologize for
that's
this.
Okay. Go ahead, because I find this to be an intriguing topic, so I'm prepared.
So we have to go all the way back to the 70s and how America defines itself every decade. We're constantly going through these shifts, and what happens is it takes us a couple of years into the new decade to realize that we're letting go, or we have to let go of what just happened, because things are always, I don't want to say they're getting worse, but our identity is always getting a little bit dumber as we reach the end of a decade. So the 70s was a lot of disco, a lot of horrible disco, and punk and metal come along in the late 70s, but they're not really, there's no groundswell for them yet until around 1980 through 1984. That's when they get really big. And then punk turns into new wave for people who can't handle the aggressive tone of punk. So you have bands like The Cure who really revolutionized music. We can't talk about them for too long, but we have to at least admit how important they were to music in general. And I'm talking with my hands over here and you can't see it.
Oh, no, okay.
That's so funny.
Well, one day we'll get your camera working, and then we'll be able to incorporate
we'll never
the
get
gesture.
my camera working. I don't want people to see how ugly I am.
Well, they can't see you on the podcast.
So you have this rejection of the 70s, right? New wave and punk are a rejection of disco. Everybody wants to forget that disco ever happened because it got so stupid. The giant bell bottoms and the glass heels and the music got so repetitive and dumb. So the 80s has to define itself again.
Okay.
And that takes a while to define. Then hair metal ruins all of that. And so the 90s come along and grunge immediately just destroys everything hair metal and glam metal. And in the process gets rid of regular metal as well, regular heavy metal, which takes a long time to find itself. So Alice in Chains is, I think, technically metal because of a lot of things they're doing, although there's this weird distortion and his voice is doing things that you wouldn't normally do in metal.
Yeah, there's a lot of wah-wah, right? Like
there's a lot of wah-wah in there.
Like only Kurt Hammett can get away with that much wah-wah, I think, and still be regarded as metal. And it's definitely, it almost adds like a banjo twang to the sound of the music,
And they have enough big hits and they come in at just the right time that I think they get swept up in the grunge movement, just like Soundgarden. I don't think Soundgarden's a grunge band.
Soundgarden sounds like Black Sabbath if you're objective about them.
They've got a lot of doom chords going on, but they also have a lot of big open chords, which we're going to talk about later. So the struggle there is that the metal umbrella has to open up a little bit to fit these bands under there. Mm-hmm. And then when you start opening the umbrella, is it still metal or or are these bands pushing the boundaries of what metal is, or are we opening the umbrella wider to accept them into the canon? And that's always the tough part about defining who is and who is not metal.
Well, I feel like metal kind of did both at the same time in the 90s. It kind of expanded, but it also kind of shrunk in an odd way. Like, it really got marginalized during the 90s. And,
yeah. There was somebody that had a really great video online. I don't remember who it was. He was talking about how the puritanical fans are what kept metal alive in the 90s. If they didn't exist, it would have died.
That's true. That's 100% true. I mean, I was one of those puritanical fans, and it was slim pickings, and it was a grim time, because like if you were like that, you just one by one were watching all of your favorite bands sort of succumb to what at the time to you felt like, you know, an invasion of music. You know, it's sort of like there was this line between grunge and metal, right? That was sort of formed. But, you know, toward the end of the 90s, I think that line softened considerably. You know, and I think by now, for most people, it's, you know, it's not, but I do think if you didn't have people that were really puritanical and maybe a little closed-minded about it, it probably wouldn't have been preserved in that sort of form. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But also you did have like the new metal bands that came in, and like you had a lot of new stuff that sort of, you know, I'm not a big new metal guy, but there was definitely like new things going on in the late 90s that allowed for that style of music to kind of continue, I suppose. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think if you go back far enough, emo starts with Fugazi, and a lot of people may not realize that that's what happened. And there's a lot of these bands today in the NU metal, the new metal. That's what you're talking about, right? New metal?
Yeah. Is it NU? I always call it new.
It's new metal to distinguish that you're talking about that actual genre and not just a new type of metal. I think there's a lot of bands that didn't know that what they were making was going to turn into Slipknot and Five Finger Death Punch and so on.
Yep.
I don't think Fugazi would have done what they were doing if they knew it was going to turn into emo.
Well, I mean, there's no telling where things will go. I mean, I remember, like, there were a few bands that sort of, and we haven't actually talked about these kind of bands, so it's kind of interesting for me to get your opinion now. I sort of had conflicted feelings when the new metal stuff was coming out, because on the one hand, I could see that it was reinvigorating something that was clearly dying, but on the other hand, I didn't really like the aesthetic all that much.
Yeah.
You know, but I like System of a Down. I remember liking them when they came out, if only because they had like the aggression. Do you know what I mean? They had like the aggressive attitude in what they were doing. Mm-hmm. And some of the other bands I liked because I felt like they were at least resurrecting some of these techniques. Like you might still hear a death growl as used as a technique rather than as like they're constantly doing it in the whole song. But you're hearing it on the radio. Do you know what I mean? Which was kind of cool.
Right.
So, but yeah, I would say my answer about Alice in Chains is I feel like they're really on the line, but I think that to me they're I've always thought of them as a bit metal, and the reason is I think they preceded the grunge boom a little bit, didn't they? When Man in a Box came out, wasn't that like right before Nirvana got big, or am I mistaken?
No, Nirvana is the band that opens it all up. Man in the Box comes right afterwards, but
okay. But
without Teen Spirit, we don't hear any of these songs.
Well, I remember Teen Spirit coming up, but for some reason, I remember Alice in Chains as just a different sound when I saw them, and for some reason, I've always assumed that they came out right before that. But either way, the sound and even the look of the band, it just felt more metal to me. And I think again, a lot of it is the fact that there was a little, and I'm not the hugest Alice in Chains fan. I only know the stuff that was on the radio and
right.
Things that maybe my friends played. But what I saw, it had an attitude to it that just felt more in the camp of metal to me than grunge. Like whenever I would watch the grunge bands, they always kind of seemed a little goofy. Do you know what I mean? There was always a humor element that was really strongly present in the things that they were doing when they were marketing their material, like on MTV and stuff. And Alice in Chains seemed a little bit more like serious songwriters, if that makes sense. Not that the grunge bands weren't serious, but just that they just felt like they had more of a metal vibe to me. but it's complicated because there's definitely stuff in there that's not metal to me. So it's a real tricky band to categorize.
Yeah. I think that they and Tool are another band where, and there's a band that kept the '90s alive, right? With metal.
Yeah, and I saw them live.
A lot of new life.
I saw them at Lollapalooza at like '97, I think, or I forget.
I was there. Which one were you at? I was at Lollapalooza too.
I was in the one in Massachusetts. So
I was at both of them in Irwindale in Southern California. I went both days.
Oh, okay. So yeah, there were a lot of drugs floating through the there's a lot going on that day. So I might as well have been in Southern California. But I remember what's his name, the singer, came out dressed up like a kabuki performer. It was a really cool stage presence that he had. Yeah. And the thing that was kind of nice about them, and I did lose interest in them after a while because I did find them to be a little bit repetitive after. Like I got one, I think I had their first two albums, and then by the third, I was starting to lose a little bit of interest. But their earlier stuff actually sounded pretty metal to me. And, and the thing just that I found intriguing about them as a guitarist was I really had trouble humming their guitar melodies. Do you know what I mean? Like I couldn't track it in my head, even though it still felt powerful and impressive. And so I almost felt like I kind of felt bad for the Tool guitarist because on the one hand, he was doing all these interesting sonic things, but he wasn't like putting his stamp on it the way a guitarist normally would. Do you know what I mean? There was like he was kind of allowing the other instruments to shine in a way guitarists don't normally do in metal.
Right.
So, it was, I found it odd, but I found it intriguing. But I would agree with you.
And that's one of their staples, right? Is to let everybody shine.
They're like the Jack Johnson of heavy metal, right? Like, remember that band, Jack Johnson? Was that the name of the band?
Vaguely. I got the metaphor.
But yeah, like their whole thing was you could tell all of the instruments were balanced, right? It was like a perfect balance of the instruments. And I feel like you're right. Tool kind of does that. It's one of the few bands where people will actually listen to the drummer. Do you know what I mean? Like people who are into Tool will often be really into the drummer or really into the bassist. And that's not often the case with music. Usually it's the singer and the guitarist that get the attention. So
I want to go off the beaten track just for a second here and talk about drummers, because when we were growing up in the 80s and listening to metal in the 70s and 80s, drumming wasn't really that important. It was an anchor, but it was kind of repetitive and not as creative. And then somehow in the last 20 years, drummers have exploded in talent. And you have a drummer, I don't remember his name, from Gojira. He's a machine. The guy from Opeth is a frickin' machine. You've got Mike Portnoy and Mark Zonder, who are two of the greatest drummers of all time. And I know Neil Peart's going to go down in history as everybody's favorite, but these guys are showing more technical acumen than Neil showed at his peak. And I think that has a lot to do with these people being able to pay attention to what Neil did, breaking down traditions and making things anew, that they're learning from everything that he did. And so drummers all of a sudden they're just dominating, in my opinion, in some of these bands.
I mean, drumming's really important, and you don't notice it until you have a bad drummer in a band. Do you know what I mean? It's right. One of those things people don't. You know what? You can't. Again, it goes to the humming thing. You can't really hum a drum track. Do you know what I mean? And so I think like the thing that gets more of the attention is the melody. I was in bands. I played guitar, and I am not very rhythmically gifted at all. So I sort of struggle to even appreciate good drummers. Do you know what I mean? Like, for all my musical experience, I had a cousin. I come from a very musical family, and I have two cousins. They're both brothers, and one of them is a drummer, one of them is a guitarist and a bass player, but also has played the drums. And I used to rely on them to sort of help guide me through who are the good drummers, because I really couldn't tell until they started pointing out, oh, listen to this syncopated rhythm, or what this guy is doing here. Right. And they were both really into the drummer from Tool when they were first coming out.
Yeah, he's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, he was, and he was one where you don't need to know much about drumming to listen and be like, oh, that's pretty impressive. It's just interesting to the ear. Do you know what I mean? You don't necessarily even need to know how time signatures work to appreciate it just at a basic level.
Right.
Now, do you find that like because I'm curious, like you said you don't play instruments, right? But you seem to have a lot of knowledge of what goes into making these instruments work. So when you're listening to a band that has a good drummer, what are you looking for exactly? Like, what are the things that are appealing to you?
Well, first of all, I did play a little guitar when I was a kid, but I didn't have the discipline for it as a child. But my father was a concert level acoustic guitar player.
Okay.
And so I grew up listening to that kind of music. So my ear is attuned, if not trained. It's not trained, but it's attuned to that sort of that level of quality. I got to see Los Indios Tabajaras as a very young child, and they're two of the greatest guitar players in the classical sense of all time. For me, I'm listening for the things that break the 4/4 patterns. The things that either take me out of the 4/4 pattern or at least make the 4/4 pattern interesting, so I'm not listening to Taylor Swift, right?
Okay.
Because
Yep.
essentially, there's no difference between Warrant and Katy Perry. There really isn't. Warrant just has more distortion, but it's the same.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that.
It's the same style of songwriting. It's the same patterns. And you could have had a drum machine in place of a lot of these glam metal drummers. And the bass players became useless. That's one of the things that really bothered me about the mid '80s was Judas Priest. Just Ian Hill there's a bass player from Judas Priest. He just disappeared from the band. You can't hear him at all after British Steel.
Or look at Injustice for All. I mean, it's famously, people question if there's even bass on the album. So so I think this would be an interesting segue into, I know we're going to get into other things, but you had mentioned math as an essential feature of your definition of heavy metal. And I was really curious what you meant by that exactly, because I think I know, and we did talk about it a little bit, but I'm still wrapping my head around it. And, you're talking about time signatures in 4/4. So were you meaning that like the thing that defines metal is using a lot of these unusual time signatures and deviating from common time?
If you listen to deviating from common time is certainly one of the features of true metal. Master of Puppets is technically in 4/8 time, I believe. If you look at any of the sheet music, I'm trying to remember the exact number. Maybe it's 8/4.
I'll try to find it while you're talking.
I'm not trying to wrap my head around because I always get the two confused. I'll do that a lot. I'm not a sheet music genius or anything like that. So the thing that ends up happening with metal is, especially a band that is that tight, is the song actually ends up being in 1732 time because of if you're listening very closely, they're sneaking in an extra note between two other jagged sounding notes. Mm-hmm. Because they've been working together so long that their timing is sharp enough that they can fill in those, they can smooth out those situations where the timing becomes 1732 instead of 4/8. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
So metal's already doing weird things with math, and I think Dillinger Escape Plan is just an incredible version of that, because I think they have a song that's in I want to say 3364 or 6432 or something really obnoxious. Mm. They go out of their way. If you look at the sheet music, and it's been a while since I've looked at it. I haven't listened to them in years, but I remember when they were coming up and somebody was saying, you really need to listen to this band. I was trying to absorb as much as I could because his voice was so bad. And I said, what is it makes this band so great? And I had to go and listen. And so breaking it down is so difficult. Talking about this, defining it is so difficult because these bands are so good at fucking with the math that if you noticed they were fucking with the math, it wouldn't sound good. It would sound like they didn't know what they were doing. If that makes sense.
No.
Rush YYZ is done in 22/7 time. And that's what first of all, that's insane. Who would do that? But if they were bad at what they were doing, it would sound awful.
Now,
but they find a way to bring those patterns back so that by the end of the seventh measure, all of those notes make sense.
Now, do you think this is prevalent through all subgenres of metal, or is it mainly like progressive and thrash and the more technically oriented subgenres?
I think any of the technical and heavy metal genres, the true heavy metal genres, they play with math at some level. Progressive certainly more than anybody. Brutal metal likes to fuck with timing. I think if you're just a grindcore band, you're just trying to play as fast as you can.
Yeah.
You're not really trying to mess with timing.
How much of it does it have to be conscious? Like, because I mean, so just for people who don't understand, like the rates that he's talking, these are incredibly fast notes that we're talking about. Too fast to even think about. Like you can't.
Yeah.
If your hand has to be doing the thinking for you when you're playing, stuff off of Master of Puppets or something. Or the much faster songs that he was just talking about. So as a player, a lot of times that's not something that I'm actively thinking about. I'm just sort of know this is this kind of a rhythm and I'm sort of doing it. Do you know what I mean? Or it's not necessarily a thought in my head. How important to you as a listener is it that the band is actually conscious of the time signature that they're writing for? Do you know what I mean? That it didn't just kind of fall into place as a result of the band being in sync with the central riff that's being constructed.
No. 19-year-old Jim would have told you it's very important.
Mm-hmm.
Now I don't think so. I think making a cohesive whole, the gestalt of the music, is so much more important to me. I think Tool, vastly aware of it. Yeah. Lateralis is done in 5-time according to the Fibonacci sequence. So they knew exactly what they were doing when they were writing that song. So it goes 1 note, then 2 notes, then 3 notes, then 5 notes, then 8 notes, then 13 notes, then back down to 8, then down to 5, 3, 2, 1, all in 5-time. So that time signature, first they're playing in 1 5-time, then 2 5-time, then 3 5-time. And because they're doing it in the right amount of layers, when they come back down to 1, everybody is caught back up with one another.
Okay. No,
does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that does. No, and Tool is highly mathematical. I remember because and again, I don't really have the aptitude to appreciate good drumming, but just as a musician listening to that band, I was blown away by the level of technical expertise the drummer had, especially when my cousins were explaining to me exactly what was going on. So I think. Oh, by the way, to just bring it back to Master of Puppets, I did look it up, and again, it's the internet. I'm going by some of the first sources that I'm finding, but it looks like there's actually a lot of debate over what the time signature of that song is.
Yeah.
And so
it's why I used it. It's because I've watched a lot of videos of people talking about it. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no. So no, but the question is whether it's 4/4 or 5/8, and I guess it all has to do with. I think you had mentioned something about this earlier in your, but some kind of extra note that might be in there, depending on whether you're counting everything as eighth notes, and it gets very technical. And I would need to sit and look at the sheet music to actually. I do have it in front of me, but I have to actually sit there and think about it for a moment to comment on it intelligently. But
it's the most famous riff in all of metal, right? Everybody knows Master of Puppets.
Yeah, I would say. I mean. I think it's one of the. I think also the opening of that album, Battery, is pretty famous too.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think of it. I mean, but it's up there. It's definitely got to be one of the most recognizable riffs. And that sort of brings me to the other topic, which is I think metal is riff based. I think, and this I think is where we would want to get into the topic of power chords and open chords and all that. But I feel like with heavy metal, it's got to be based on riffs. And I think that's the thing that's really what separates metal from, say, like Jimi Hendrix or something. Do you know what I mean? Where, there's a lot of the virtuosity with somebody like Hendrix, and there's a lot of the power and a lot of the other elements. He's lighting his guitar on fire. Do you know what I mean? But,
sure, yeah.
But it doesn't feel like metal because he's sort of doing the traditional thing where he's flowing between having like maybe an opening riff or an opening melody, but then going into playing the guitar as it was traditionally intended to be played. Do you know what I mean? With chords and that are sort of alternating between melodic lines and, a visible chord progression. almost a little bit more like when you listen to like a classical guitarist play. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But heavy metal, the riffs are sort of prevalent throughout the music. So I think that's where the power and they're often power chord based riffs. So I think that's a another key feature of the genre.
Yeah, and I think we can thank Richie Blackmore for that and Tony Iommi, right? Because is that Iommi or Ioni?
I always call him Iommi, but I'm not good with names.
Okay,
so.
yeah, okay, fair enough.
It's probably Yomi or something. It's probably like the I is pronounced like a Y or something unusual, but I'll look it up.
I think he's the only Tony in metal and pre-metal, so we'll just call him Tony. So you got Tony and Blackmore, right? Who are marrying their music really well with the bass line at their time, and they're sort of the inventors of, at least the progenitors of making riffs that sound like this. Especially Tony. I mean, the stuff he was doing.
Well, like da 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 da. Like that kind of stuff is just
he's inventing 4 different subgenres of metal on just a couple of albums. They're not really inventing them, but you know what I mean. He's laying the groundwork.
Yeah.
And if we can't honor the work that he's doing at that level back then, and then you've got, I always keep going back to Judas Priest, 1, because I love them, and 2, because I've really studied how they got where they are. Their first album wasn't metal at all. It was called Rock-a-Rolla.
Yeah, I remember when I listened to that album, I was like, what the hell is this? This doesn't sound like Judas Priest.
It took them a long time to get where they were, to find their sound.
You know what that's like? It's like have you ever seen the crooner band that Dio was in before he was in metal?
I have actually.
And so it's like these guys were around before metal existed, before rock and roll even existed in a lot of cases. So this stuff is still developing, and it must have been a totally different thing to be there as it's being carved out, rather than after the fact, where we sort of have hindsight to guide us into, okay, this is what metal is supposed to be about. But a band like Judas Priest is actively figuring out what metal is as they go, which I think is almost more fascinating than listening to a band that has the privilege of, there's this whole history of the genre, and so you can kind of draw on any period of metal to sort of cobble together your band.
Right. And I think maybe that's one of the attractions of, say, not emo music, but all the hipster music that comes out of emo when those kids grow up, is they think they're inventing new sounds because they keep, in their mind, are pushing all these envelopes to try to see where they can take their speak and spell band, how far they can take it. And I think it ends up, because people think they're inventing something new, they're trapped in the patterns of the artist being more important than the art, versus people who don't even know that they're inventing something new. They're just exploring. If you're in a band in high school, you go into your garage and you just keep practicing and trying to play what it is that you like. And eventually you get good enough to say, I want to try to write a song.
Yep.
And I'll use Tool as an example, because I've actually watched videos of them talking about the process of McGannon. What's the Voivod Tool guitar player's name?
I don't know his name.
Daniel Mongrain. So Mongrain and the bass player will get in the studio first, before the drummer even comes in, and they'll come up with a riff. Doesn't matter what it is. They'll just pick some notes and they'll start playing a riff, and they'll stretch that riff in every direction they possibly can. In every time signature they can, at every pace that they can, every tempo, and he'll pull back and let the bass player put on some layers, and they'll just keep practicing it at every direction that they possibly can for, say, 6 hours. And then they'll stop and go, is that any good? Is anything in there something that we can use? And they either throw it away and start over, or they find a way to make it work, and then they bring in the drummer. And now it's time to layer this and make a track, right? And when you get there, I think you don't know you're inventing new music. I don't think you realize that you're making something so different that you get to the point. First of all, Tool's another of my favorite bands, and I appreciate that you don't like them. I get why you don't.
Well, I didn't say I don't like
Tool
them.
is so
I do
different.
like Tool. I do like Tool. I just over time I lost interest in them as their career went on.
Right,
But
I get it.
But I like them. I do like them.
Eventually you get to the point where Tool today sounds nothing like Tool back then.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the same guys making the same music. The bass player's new. He's different than the guy on the first album.
Well, the guy on the first album wasn't as good as the guy on the second album, in my opinion.
Right.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. And I think the drummer's different than they first started with, too. I don't remember. I don't look at their timelines very well. But I was there for one of the bass player's last performances. I was at one of their shows a long time ago. And I think a band like Tool is inventing something new without worrying about we need to be different.
Yeah.
Their love of creation is what leads to something different. And that, I think, is what we can say about, going all the way back to your original point, about these croners in Dio's original band who didn't even know they were going to grow into metal because metal wasn't a thing yet. The love of creation for these guys in an era that was so... I mean, the 50s and the mid-60s were just so devoid of creativity that you have people so hungry to make something. And then drugs, of course, open everybody's minds, and they're seeing things differently. I think metal, even developing at all, is in some ways an accident because of the thirst for creativity, which you can't find in a world where people are trying to be different for the sake of being different as opposed to trying to create art for the sake of creating art. I think those are two different paths to success.
So, like...
That was a long answer.
No, but I think you're onto something there because the whole... and Pete was sort of touching on this in his answer to what metal is when he was talking about the attitude, but the motivation is not just about, I'm going to sort of carve out this space to be different, but there needs to be sort of something a little bit more authentic going on, underlying everything. But you had said something about how people create differently now, almost. I think that's what you said.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I feel like now when people are creating a new thing, they actively combine two ingredients that are different in order to produce something new. So, for example... Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I said, yeah, right.
Yeah, so like, people will say, well, I'm going to take this subgenre and I'm going to mash it up with this subgenre, and then it'll be my new sound that I've created. Do you know what I mean? And there's always been that combining of things, but I feel like the difference before was people, they arrive there with all of their influences, and after the fact, you can sort of dissect what the influences are. So you can look at, like, Randy Rhoads, right? You can say, oh, yeah, I can see the classical influence there. Or you can look at, like, some of the weird poppy music we were getting in the mid-'80s and say, oh, that's a combination of classical and 50s music sort of being put in a blender together. But it wasn't necessarily conscious. And I feel like when it's overly conscious, the end result more often than not has an artificial feeling to it. Do you know what I mean? It's a So and I think I was really noticing, and it wasn't just in music. I was noticing it in role playing. I was noticing it in movies. I think the best example that I could think of is Cowboys and Aliens. Do you know what I mean? Where it's just like, we're just going to put these two concepts together and that's it. It's sort of
you have stumbled onto my favorite topic. So I can talk about mashups all day if you want.
Well, yeah, let's talk about mashups because I think I'm fine getting into that territory.
Well, it's not going to be. This is going to go off the rails of music. Are you okay with that?
That's okay. I do want to get back to open chords eventually, but I'm fine with this topic.
I think that I talk about this a lot. There's a big difference between. I'm going to stop saying the word think. There's a big difference between genre and veneer. Veneer is a piece of genre.
Mm-hmm.
Genre is made up of structure and veneer. So if I say I'm making a fantasy movie, it probably needs to have elves and humans and dwarves. Maybe. The other outlying races aren't that important. But it can't have aliens. If I put aliens in it, it's not fantasy anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's a certain structure to fantasy. It's usually the hero's journey. Right? Somebody finds something out that they're not supposed to know, or they have a map to something, or they've discovered something that needs to be forged or destroyed. The 36 plots apply to fantasy really, really well. But there's always a structure of I have to meet somebody early on in the story who knows more than me and gives me some helpful advice. All of the Baba Yaga character because we get all of our fantasy tropes, by the way, from Eastern Europe. The Slavs invented this kind of storytelling. And then Hans Christian Andersen borrowed it all on fairy tales. And then fantasy grew out of all that. I can talk genre all fucking day.
Okay.
So the veneer of fantasy gets wrapped up too much in actual fantasy. If you read trash genre novels today that have an elf on the cover, and inside the whole thing reads out like a romance novel, that's not fantasy. It's borrowing the veneer, but it's not following the structure. And
so is your contention that that mashups are just putting the veneers together, or
that's where I'm getting that mashups almost inherently, and I wrote a mashup screenplay, which is where I'm going to finally get to with this. When you look at Cowboys and Aliens, there's no Western tropes and there's no science fiction tropes in that movie. It is just the veneer of the two being smashed together, and in equal parts, by the way. And this is why mashups fail. People want to make them half and half, and that's not good mashup. Mashup needs to be closer to 3/4 and 1/4, or maybe 1/3 and 2/3. You have to pick the structure that's more important to you, and then pull the pieces of the veneer that work. Not all of them. You cannot pull all of them into your work, and then have a successful thing. So if Faith No More was a mashup band of some rap and metal.
Yeah.
And if it had been 100% rap and 100% metal mashed together, it probably wouldn't have worked. Death Row was Ice-T's metal band. It wasn't good because it was a 50-50 mixture of the two.
Is that different from? Are you thinking of Body Count, or is that a different band?
Body Count. That's Death Row was somebody else. Sorry.
That's okay.
Body Count was the name of his band. Faith No More is mostly hardcore rock and metal mixed with a little bit of rap. And I went to high school, by the way, with Dave, and so I knew them when he was in Mr. Bungle.
What's your feeling on Mr. Bungle, by the way?
Well, I was friends with these guys when I was growing up, so it's hard for me to divorce myself from seeing where they were when they started, and how long it took them to develop their sound. But at the time, I didn't like it simply because I was such a metal purist. But they were all good at what they were doing. I mean, I can't deny that.
That band, not that band, the album California, I remember getting that, and I was very impressed by just the array of transitions in the music. And again, it gets sort of maybe back to the time signature thing, but they seemed capable of dipping into like 8 different genres in a single song. But maybe by your reasoning in this argument, that's a bad thing. I don't know. So yeah, I'm sorry. Go on though. Go on.
So I think if they had tried to marry those sounds half and half, I don't think it would have worked in any of those bands. And the reason Faith No More works is because they're picking up some of the grooves. I'm really getting off topic now. Are you familiar with Husker Du, the punk band?
I am not. I don't know that much about punk. I do know about Faith No More because I had that album.
Right.
With I forget the name of it, but the one with the inverted candles on the cover that had the epic song on it.
Yeah, I don't remember the name of any of their albums, but I think it was I don't know. It wasn't even their first album, so.
Yeah, the first one had like a guy with a mohawk, I think, and had that We Care a Lot song on it.
Yeah. So Husker Du was a punk band from Minneapolis. I think their first album, Land Speed Record, was, I want to say 1982, somewhere in there. And punk was already on its way out. And then they showed up and they had a completely different sound that nobody had heard before in punk. And they didn't reinvigorate it, but they certainly put their stamp on it.
Okay.
And then, I don't remember if Metal Circus came next, or was it Zen Arcade? It doesn't matter. Zen Arcade is quintessential, the greatest album of all time. I won't even let people debate me on this. If you don't listen to it or you're not familiar with it, I've probably studied the album for 1,000 hours.
What's the name of the album again?
Zen Arcade.
Zen Arcade, okay.
It looks like they're walking through a junkyard if you look at the cover. It sounds nothing like punk. It sounds nothing like funk. It sounds nothing like jazz. It sounds nothing like reggae. It sounds nothing like metal or rock or any of these elements that they pulled in to make that album. You will never hear a sound like it. It is so impossible to quantify what that album is. And yet, they pulled all those elements together in the right ingredients. Knowing how to form a recipe and make it into a finished dish is the quintessential ability to do a mashup.
Okay.
And if you took two ingredients and put them in a bowl, and they were equal parts lettuce and tomato, that would be a horrible salad.
Yep.
Nobody wants to eat that much tomato, or nobody wants to eat that much lettuce, right? The salad is usually made up of mostly lettuce or mostly cabbage or whatever it is that you're doing, with a sprinkling of all these other little ingredients. And that's the problem people make. And I should have started with this metaphor.
That's okay.
That's the mistake people make with mashups is this desire to get all their favorite things into the same bowl.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. I'm just trailing off now.
I was going to add that I think the other mistake people make, now that I'm thinking about this, is that they think that being creative is the act of adding things together, and they never think to subtract anything. Do you know what I mean? And like you were talking, I think a couple of weeks ago about Judas Priest, and how a lot of how they helped to shape metal was by taking the blues out. Right? So it's not just about mashing up. A simpleton might look at metal and say it's a mashup of the blues and this and that and, whatever styles of music they think contribute to heavy metal. But a lot of it's actually, no, it's about we're taking out this stuff. We're taking out the stuff that doesn't feel like heavy metal to us. And it's sort of a slow process of discovering exactly what that is. And so I think there's... go ahead. I'm sorry.
Coco Chanel once said, when you get dressed in the morning, take off one item, and now you're ready to go out. Because she understood. Is Coco a he or she?
I have no idea.
I think Coco's a she. I'm not a fashion guy, but I read things, and I pay attention to what's going on in all worlds of art. Because she understood that nobody really knows how to dress themselves, and they usually over-accessorize. So, knowing what... Without having to teach somebody all the elements of design, knowing that people overdo it, she knew, just take the glitter off and you're ready to go. And Picasso once said, before you can learn to create art, you must learn how to draw. You must master the process of drafting something. And it doesn't have to be a person. It could be an apple, it could be a pear, it could be a table. But if you can't draw that thing perfectly every time, you will never be able to change it once you learn what the process of change is. And that, to Picasso, was art, was the process of change, right? So all of these forms of creation, I'm going to go to game design now because I'm just on a roll today.
Okay. All right.
Just too much. I'm all hopped up on tea. There's a lot of game designers that keep reinventing the wheel, right? I'm not going to pick on Fate. I pick on Fate a lot. But I'll pick
on Fate. I don't care. Pick on Fate if you want.
Fudge was a genius system. The original Fate system was called Fudge. It understood exactly what had been going wrong with traditional role-playing games for years, and it said, I'm going to make a rule system that addresses 800 different flaws, and I'm going to reduce it down to its essence, and I'm going to give game masters the tools that they need. The problem is it was a game for really good game masters. It was not a game for bad game masters, right? It didn't. If you were bad at game mastering, this was just going to make you worse.
And by the way, that's often where a lot of debates in gaming center around, is really the quality of the GM involved.
Right. But that requires self-reflection, and we know that nerds and geeks aren't very good at self-reflection, actually. So you can't look at a book and go, what is it I can use from this? They look at a book and go, these are all rules. I have to use it all.
Yes.
And again, we're back to the recipe metaphor of knowing what ingredients to take and which ingredients not to take. You won't use every single monster in the monster manual in an adventure. Everybody knows that. You pick and choose the monsters from the monster manual.
No, I got to say, if the promise of an evening where every monster in the monster manual is used is has my curiosity piqued. But yeah. I think you're right on that one.
So I'm losing my thread.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say you were going in the direction of how we were talking about game master quality, and
so modern designers need, for some reason, to reinvent the wheel every single time. And I'm going to use the new brand of hipster designers who have been around actually for over a decade now. When they first started showing up on the scene, and I'll use Ron Edwards as an example, the guy that used to run the Forge. He sat down and wrote a treatise on all this language for game design because one did not exist. And I appreciate that he sat down and wrote one because a lot of the stuff that he wrote changed the way we talk about game design. But a lot of the people that came afterwards who were designing were reinventing the wheel for things that already existed. And so you'll have a lot of people who don't have the mastery of the craft yet, and they already want to change the craft. And a lot of these hipster games that you see coming out, I'll use Fiasco as an example.
Okay.
Fiasco attempted to do something really cool as its mission statement. It is a really cool goal. It at no point addresses the fact that there have always been players at the table who want to fuck shit up and ruin other people's fun, and you just gave them the biggest hammer to ever do that, ever create. And now it's a gateway game to indie and non-traditional role-playing, and people think all indie gaming and all non-traditional gaming is about fucking up other people's fun. And so it's you have the science to do this, but should you do this question the trope that people throw around a lot. And people constantly trying to reinvent the wheel that's already been invented without knowing the pieces that have been invented.
Which by the way, is sort of, I can see how that happens a lot because the gaming community has historically been so fragmented that, there are people that have been in their own corner doing things one way and people in another corner. And, and a lot of the stuff that goes on online, people are completely unaware of. So, but go on.
No, and I think that's eventually going to happen as we get more and more fractured. Getting all the way back to music, I think people trying to reinvent the wheel of how the structure of sound works. You can't just... I love Indian music. I love Bagra Sikh music as well, and I understand the structure of how they work. I would never think to pull... because I'm not a good enough musician, but I would never even think to pull the 3-beat style of Bhangra music from the Punjab into heavy metal. And I've heard people trying to do it online, and they have to make so many surgical maneuvers through the music to make them mesh.
It has to be complementary is the issue.
Yeah, they have to be complementary. Exactly. I've seen people have to make all these dancing surgical moves through the music that essentially you're just borrowing the veneer of something. You're not borrowing the heart of it. Well,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, if you look at, Yngwie Malmsteen and these people that were taking all the classical stuff, that fit like a glove. Baroque music just fits over metal fine. And I think it's, again, when you are going to combine things, you really got to see, is this a good fit? I think we talked about Load a little bit last time. I think that's why an album like Load didn't work for so many people, because they were combining music that it was sort of like, it was like two different flavor palettes coming together that just weren't meant to be combined. And you have to be aware of, are these palettes, a fitting combination, or is this such a rich, stew that I'm drawing from that it's just not going to work when I put cheese on it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I could see how, and also, I'm curious what that music sounds like, because you say people are trying to pull it off, but I can definitely see how there would be, musical structures and styles that just are not going to lend themselves to metal, no matter how hard you try.
Well, what is happening is the people that are doing it are in the Punjab, right? Mm-hmm. So they're taking their beat structure, and then they're just borrowing the death growls and the distortion from metal. And those aren't the heart of metal. Those are just some of the trappings, the veneer
I see
of
what
metal,
you're saying.
the growls and the distortion. There's a guy that takes, he's online, I forget his name, Joe something. He takes pop songs and then plays them on his daughter's little toy instruments, and then he calls it metal because of the distortion.
Okay.
The distortion isn't what makes it metal, buddy. Stop calling these songs the metal version of Katy Perry's Eye of the Tiger, or whatever that song is called. That's not what makes it metal. You're just putting distortion on her song. It's still pop.
Well, this gets into interesting territory because I remember we were talking about styles of music. If you transpose them into like a heavy metal band, would they be metal? And I guess that's maybe an answer to that question. Like, is it not? It's. Are you saying metal isn't really just strictly about the instrumentation? That there's, if you poured in, music that is too uplifting or not in the right type of key signature, that it won't be metal, even if it's performed in a metal manner.
When you transpose music from the guitar to the piano, you have to decide if you're going to compose it from chord to chord, note to note, note to chord, chord to note.
Yep.
You have to make that decision when you're making that transposition, right?
There's all kinds of things you get, like when you're doing like so number one, just and I'm not an expert on the piano, but I played a little bit. But I mean, piano is a two-handed instrument, so right there you just have the capacity to do both a bass line and a melody that isn't present on the guitar. So transposing the guitar to the piano, I feel, is maybe a little bit easier, even though a lot of the nuances get lost because there are things you can do on the guitar you can't do on piano. Transposing piano to guitar is very difficult if the song involves like a moving bass line. And that's so those kind of things are big considerations when you're transposing from one instrument to another. But I'm sorry, I don't know if I answered the question at all or if I just added confusion.
No. I think that's enough for me to make my point. I think when you're borrowing this stuff, you can't just make a one-to-one transition. There's a band called Redemption. They're a prog metal band. Ray Alder from Fate's Warning used to sing with them. They had an album, Origins of Ruin, which is just one of the best progressive metal albums out there. It is so freaking good. And everything before and after sort of feels like it's not the same band. They did an album where they did a bunch of covers of non-prog, non-metal songs. So they took Edge of the Blade by Journey and turned it into a prog song. Okay. Except they didn't. It's still Edge of the Blade by Journey, just with their instruments and they didn't prog it up, so to speak.
Yeah.
So it's nice that they did a cover of it, but don't tell me it's progressive metal. You didn't give me a progressive version of Tori Amos's whatever song that is, the one about the boys that want to get with her. I think that's all of her songs. But they didn't change anything about it, but they wanted to put their progressive stamp on it, and I don't think it works. And I love the band, and I love the previous album, but I have to look at it with a clinical eye and say, that's not prog. That's not prog metal.
Well, something definitely, like, okay, remember, I don't know if you listened to it, but I sent you the No Presents for Christmas song on Facebook when we were chatting a little bit, and
you sent a lot of links.
Yeah. So yeah, I got a little crazy, but there's a Merciful Fate. Maybe it was King Diamond. I think it was a Merciful Fate song. No Presents for Christmas, and it's got Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer in there, and it's a fun song, but it definitely doesn't feel like metal. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The Rudolph music just sucks out any metal vibe that's being established by the rest of the instruments. And again, I think I enjoy the song. I like the fact that they're able to emulate a genre of music that is way outside of metal. It shows how skilled the musicians were, but it definitely doesn't feel like metal. And I think like I get that, like when I see a lot of these channels, which I do watch, where somebody's like, I'm going to take the songs from Mario Brothers and turn them into metal. It very rarely works for me. I think part of the reason though isn't because you can't do that. I feel like nobody really seems to understand what metal is when they're trying to create something. When they're trying to turn something into metal, I feel like their definition is off, and so they're just right from the beginning. They've already failed. Do you know what I mean?
Right, and we're right back to where we started with all this, which is 1, you have to master the ingredients. 2, you have to understand what's in the recipe. If you're going to make a roux, you need to know why the oil, the butter, and the flour go together to make the roux. if you're a cook. And the same is true with music. You have to understand why we stripped out the blues and still created this industrial Town of Leeds sound in this old Black Sabbath song or this old Judas Priest song.
Why did we strip out the blues? What is the blues like? What anti-metal effect is the blues having?
I think. Metal? Well, first of all, I think it. Oddly enough, it's a way to not rob the blues of its heart, because the blues is about your personal suffering, mm-hmm. right? If you're writing a bluesy song, you're talking about something bad that happened to you, and you can't use that structure to write a song about falling in love unless it has heartache in it.
Yeah.
So if you want to write a new kind of song but still borrow that structure, you've got to pull out the twang. Mm-hmm. The twang can't be in there anymore. You've got to add the riffs. You've got to add a little bit of the distortion. You've got to add a different timing signature. You've got to give the other instruments an opportunity to shine, because most of the blues is acoustic, right? The other instruments aren't really doing much in the blues. It's the guitar player and the singer.
Well, I mean, it depends on the blues. You do start getting, electrified blues, but I mean,
sure,
it's
sure. I like is it Seawater Steve? Is that his name? Sailor Steve?
I'm not sure.
He plays a 2-stringed guitar and he plays the blues, and he's a fantastic musician. I think he's fantastic, but I still wouldn't listen to him as my only source of income. But I think you have to pull all that stuff out of the blues, and I'm not a devotee of the blues either, so that makes it difficult to talk about. But if you want to sing about new things like black magic, and you want to talk about, in the case of Deep Purple, singing about a hotel burning to the ground, that actually song is quite bluesy. That's a bad example. But if you want to talk about black magic like Black Sabbath was doing, you have to strip away some of those bluesy elements.
Well, and the thing is, there's it's sort of like there's a contradiction here too, because you don't really have metal without blues. Like, blues definitely ultimately gives rise to.
No, I get it. And we're back to what I said about Fugazi, right? Fugazi's song structure led to emo.
Yeah.
But the emo kids pulled out all the heart from what Fugazi was doing, and then they just used the chord structures that he had created.
Well, and I think there's something inherent in metal where it sort of does this. So like you sort of, so metal is sort of birthed a little bit by the blues, and it jettisons so much of the blues, right? And there's this ongoing debate in metal about the role of punk music, right? And I feel like you don't really, like, the thrash music sound doesn't make a whole lot of sense unless you factor in punk. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
right.
And that's an idea a lot of metal people don't like, because punk is generally held in low regard by a lot of metal fans, right? Or traditionally it has been. And so I feel like metal does this thing where it absorbs a little bit from a style, but then it rejects the style. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of like, that's trash. We're going to take like this one component of it, but we're going to reject everything else about it.
Right.
And,
right.
And it sort of does that with classical too. You're never, like, that's why I sent you that Danzig thing, that Black Aria thing, and you can't go full, and that by the way, that album is not full classical. That album is just Danzig dicking around on a keyboard, but that was the attempt. And I feel like metal, you can't go full symphony with metal. Do you know what I mean? Like, we have symphonic metal, and it's a subgenre, but it's not like a sustainable. I don't know. There's something unmetal about absorbing all of the trappings of classical music. You can absorb a certain amount of it, but not all of it. And maybe this is kind of getting to the mashup thing you were talking about.
Right.
But I definitely do think metal has this tendency to absorb a little bit from something, but ultimately reject a lot of the other aspects of it, almost in a way that is sort of there's a sense of ridicule. Like, when I was in my metal band, we used to make fun of the bluesy guys. Do you know what I mean? The guys who played blues to us were people that we sort of I don't know, we thought less of them because they liked to bend notes for some reason. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I get it.
So, and I mean, obviously these aren't ideas that I still cleave to, but it's present in the development of this style. There's definitely, like, metal, I think more than a lot of other genres, defines itself by identifying the things it doesn't like in other genres and absolutely avoiding being those things. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So,
I think that is a great definition. That is fantastic.
Yeah, it's taken us a while to get here, but I think it's a that definitely seems like part. It kind of explains the attitude too. Do you know what I mean the mentality in metal is so harsh in how it deals with the things it doesn't like, and you see that when fans are very wary of just how many ballads a band can get away with on an album, right? There's only so much. We want the music to be melodic, but we don't want an overabundance of melody. If there's too much, people start to get suspicious of what's going on. Do you know what I mean? So I don't know. I don't know if that takes us anywhere interesting, but I did want to get. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
It does take us somewhere interesting because it takes us to synthesizers and keyboards, which we were talking about before we recorded. Yep. Before we turned on the recording, because there was this attempt to introduce them into metal in the early 80s. I want to say 83, 84. And I knee-jerked. I know everybody I know knee-jerked.
Yep.
We didn't like it. Seventh Son of a Seventh Son by Iron Maiden has way too much synthesizer.
Now, here's where we're going to have an interesting discussion, because I love Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, but I totally understand what you're saying about synth. Seventh Son of a Seventh Son is one of my favorite Iron Maiden albums, largely because it sounds so different from all their other stuff. I mean, it sounds a bit like Somewhere in Time, but they took it and they really went heavily in that direction with Seventh Son. And it's got all the other stuff we were talking about, like the amazing time signature changes and crazy, just crazy math with the notes. Like some of the notes in that album are ridiculous, and and also it's got it's probably their most medieval sounding of all their albums. Do you know what I mean? The melodies of those songs to me really feel Renaissance inspired. In a way that Hallowed Be Thy Name felt. Do you know what I mean? Just sort of really drawing on that Renaissance style of melody. But go on, because I'm curious. I do want to hear your thoughts about Seventh Son.
Well, I absolutely love it now. Mm-hmm. I bought the cassette. That's how old I am. I bought the cassette while I was on a road trip for school in this small town, and I immediately started listening to it on my Walkman. And I must have listened to it about 20 times before I got home. Mm-hmm. And I immediately hated it because of the synth, right? I heard that synthesizer on Moonchild as soon as it opens. And I just, where are they going? What is this? This isn't metal. You can't do this. Because I'm 17 and I'm a puritanical asshole, and I'm not going to allow synthesizers in metal. Well, I'm in charge, goddammit.
Well, and also on Peace of Mind, they specifically said we didn't use synthesizers in this album, and they were proud.
Yeah, they were staunchly against them for the longest time. And then, of course, Dio has them too on Rainbow in the Dark, and then Judas Priest introduced them in the worst way possible on Turbo Lover, but that's another story. That's actually a burning question of mine, is your thoughts on Turbo Lover, but we'll hold that in abeyance. I'm already getting angry. So I listened to it, and once I could get past the synthesizer, right, and once it had become part of the enjoyment of listening to the album, because I was still going to listen to it. It was still Iron Maiden, and it was still structurally sound, except for that song, Can I Play With Madness? I can't stand it. One of their worst songs.
I agree with you 100%. That's the song on the album I don't like. It's the way.
And there's always one of those poppy, radio-friendly tracks that feels like were built specifically for Bruce's voice and nobody else's instrumentation. And Bruce just ruins that with those sour notes and that bad harmonizing with himself. It's just a bad song.
I can't follow the melody of that song very.
I skip it now, but the rest of the album, I think the guitar solo in Seventh Son of a Seventh Son is their best guitar solo.
Yes, 100%.
I think the overall structure of the album, the way every song ties together, was genius, and without being over the top, in your face. If Dream Theater does a thematic album, they punch you in the face with it. Yeah. Every song here is going to be about the Illuminati. Look for it. Look for every single reference and every single line. But these songs all stood up by themselves.
Yes.
And yet belong to the whole, which I really like. And then it even ends on a song that makes you want to start the album all over again.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
And everything about that album, except for the synthesizer and that Can I Play with Madness, is just them at the top of their game.
And it's also, if you took out the synthesizer, it would actually be quite a heavy album. That's the interesting thing about it. There's some really heavy stuff in there. It's certain songs, at least. But it doesn't feel heavy because the synth sort of, I don't know, it does give it sort of a cloudy vibe. Do you know what I mean? I think
if you had known me back then, if you could have seen my eyes, because I've got the headset on, and I've got the tape in, and as soon as that at the beginning of Moonchild comes in, after he sings the seventh son of a seventh son at the beginning, he does that little rhyme, a cappella, and then the song starts. My eyes were the size of dinner plates. I just said, what the fuck happened to my band? What is going on?
You know, it's funny. I was in a death metal band that became a doom metal band, and I remember I was the guy in the band that liked Iron Maiden, and I was trying to convince my singer that we should do some of their songs, and I chose Moonchild as my. That was the argument I was going to pitch to this guy, and he was like a death metal fan and a Megadeth fan, and like into the harder edge stuff, and so he heard the first few notes and he was like, no, this is not good music. I'm sorry. So a lot of people felt like you did about that music at the time.
I hope he's listening and he can appreciate the fact that we all hated that song the first time we listened to it. It took a lot of re-listens.
I didn't. I genuinely liked it the first time. And it's funny
I'm
because
kicking you off the podcast. You're done.
Well, I don't know what it was. The keyboards I didn't even notice the keyboards. Do you know what I mean? It didn't even occur to me there are keyboards in this song. But I think that's because keyboards never really bothered me that much. Because I didn't associate them with the things that other people did. I had a keyboard as when I was in a band, and I used to use the thing all the time to help me write music. Do you know what I mean? Because I could record like a string track, and then I could, record another track for the bass line, another track for piano, and off of that I would somehow cobble together something on the guitar, and so it just never bothered me. But also, the first band that I got into before I got into metal was The Doors, and I always kind of liked the sound of the electric organ. And my uncle, remember I told you the story about my uncle? He was an electric organ player, so it just never bothered me. I do think that the problem with synth in the 80s is different from the problem of keys in the 70s. In the 70s, you have bands like Deep Purple and Moody Blues that incorporate a lot of these electric organs, but they're very powerful. So it would be very complementary to heavy metal to sort of use that kind of an organ sound. But in the 80s, you had a much more airy sound going on in the synthesizer, and it didn't really pair as well with heavy metal. I think that was really like exactly the stuff you're talking about, like on Seventh Son, the opening keyboard intro. It doesn't make you feel like you're in a heavier place. It makes you feel like you're floating in the sky. Do you know what I mean? It just creates a vibe that's maybe a little bit off for heavy metal. But also, I guess my question would then be, what's your feeling about bands that use keyboard to create like a sense of symphonic atmosphere? Are you okay with that, or does that bother you? Does that, especially with keyboards as they've gotten better, just technologically?
I'm still pretty puritanical in my metal taste, but my mind has certainly opened for a lot of stuff, especially if we're talking about progressive metal, right? Yeah. Kevin Moore appears on a couple of Fate's Warning albums, and he adds so much to the sound that, because he's a fucking musical genius, that you can't get mad and say that's not metal. Yeah. That is absolutely 100% the sound that should be in the song "Say Still Remains," which is a classic anthem for Fate's Warning. So I think people that know what they're doing when they bring it in, they bring the organ. Opeth brings the organ in on their last 4 albums, which has just been outstanding. Now,
is it like a pipe organ-y sound, or is it like what kind of organ are they playing?
It sounds like one of those. It's hard to define, I guess. I don't know all the different kinds of organs, but it has sort of an orchestral sound to it, and it's used correctly. But it's also got a bit of the if you took the Doors and married it with Deep Purple,
Mm-hmm.
you would get that kind of organ sound on, say, a song like Era or Sorceress.
Okay.
Which I recommend if you want to hear it, listen to Era. Listen to The Sorceress by Opeth. That's a really good song for hearing how they do the organ. But I think I told you to listen to Cusp of Eternity and Eternal Rains Will Come.
I think I did listen to Cusp of, but we listen to a lot of music, so a lot of it is sort of in a blender in my head. But I'll make a point of revisiting the Opeth stuff, because both you and Pete have mentioned Opeth, and I mean, I've listened to them, but I haven't got deep into them. They're
now I'll tell you right now, I don't like their old stuff. Pete might like their old stuff, but I cannot do his death growls, despite how just genius the rest of the augmentation of the sound is.
Well, I do want to talk about death growls, but I think Pete's also into the newer stuff. I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, I'm sorry. Go on.
So I forget where we were.
That's okay. That's okay. Well,
we were talking about organs. I think I answered the question.
Well, yeah. So really what we were talking about was whether keyboards were metal, and you definitely say they're not. And I would say my answer is probably they definitely are an ambiguous instrument when it comes to metal. Like there's a lot of problems raised by the presence of a keyboard for sure.
The problem with any kind of answer any kind of answer to that question is Black Sabbath, Judas Priest, Iron Maiden are the big three.
Yeah.
And if you want to throw Metallica in, you can, but I don't think you should. And Judas
don't
Priest
you think you're missing something if you don't pull in one of the later thrash metal bands, or if
okay, then I'll pull in Slayer. Because Slayer never,
okay, fair enough.
They never wavered. They never sold out.
Well, and what's good about bringing in Slayer is you kind of get the death metal vibe as well. So
right.
you get a hint of what else is to come.
So 3 of those 4 bands had 2 guitarists, and that right there sort of defined the blueprint for metal.
Mm-hmm.
And there were lots of bands. We talked about King Crimson offline, right? I think the first ever metal song created was 21st Century Schizoid Man. I think that's the first metal song ever made. That has 3 drummers, right? If we'd allowed that to be the blueprint for what a metal band is, the sound would be very different from what we actually have now. And so the blueprint for metal gets defined early, and when you pick it up as a child, it's very different than when you pick it up as an adult. So my formative years taught me, no, metal has 2 guitar players. It has 1 drummer.
Yeah.
It has 1 singer who has a wide range between the lower range, and in the case of Rob Halford, can hit a high C, right? So these are definitions that I didn't have the words for when I was 13, but I knew the parameters pretty well. And so if I had to define it today and I'd never heard metal before, my definition would be really different because there's so many more ingredients in the complete goulash that is metal.
Well, I do want to ask this. How do you feel? I mean, I guess one of the defining traits of metal these days is just the sheer number of subgenres.
Yeah. There's 30, 40. Yeah.
And, but, when I got into metal, like, there weren't that many. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think, Death and Doom were still kind of being invented. Do you know what I mean? Like, so, and then over the course of the 90s, I feel we got this proliferation. Is the subgenre thing maybe kind of a problem for metal? Like, does it make it... when you have all these subgenres, how many bands can actually fit into each subgenre, right? Like, it's not that many. So...
I have a really long answer again.
Go ahead. That's okay.
I'm one of those people that stitches together a lot of different theory to answer questions.
Uh-huh.
So we have to go back to the social movement that is metal and punk to answer your question. First of all, punk is a social movement. It's not a music style. That's one of the things people get wrong about punk, and it's why the word gets used wrong when we're mashing up fiction styles. Mm-hmm. Oh, this is steampunk. Where the fuck's the punk? Well, that guy's got a nose ring. That's not punk. Uh-huh. Punk is a social movement. It was about young, white trash kids in urban centers who had been left behind because of white flight of the middle class into the suburbs, and they had no identity anymore, and they were trying to find themselves, and they were all poor, and so they turned to this mostly communistic movement that had a musical sound associated with it that made them feel like they belonged to something. That's a long, complicated answer that leads to metal. Metal was for kids who were either white trash or didn't belong, who did live in these suburban areas, who needed to stand out because they didn't have an identity that anybody was appreciating in their schools, right? Everybody belonged to some sort of clique.
Cliques were a big thing when we were growing up. Yeah, cliques were a very big thing.
In junior high school and high school, everybody belonged to some sort of clique. So metal develops as a clique for kids to say, leave me the fuck alone, look how tough I am. Mm-hmm. So metal has to sound tough.
Yeah.
Right? That is one of the main ingredients of metal in order for these kids to stick around for it. And the subgenres come out because, Iron Maiden just added synthesizers. Well, those guys are pussies.
Yeah.
I'm not listening to them anymore. And I'm obviously using the word pussy the way the kids would use it.
No, I know what you mean. I know what you mean. We use that term all the time growing up. I know what you mean. But I want to hold you there because I think there's I was thinking about this morning, and I was thinking about like doom metal, right? And I was thinking about thrash metal and how thrash metal is so aggressive and, for lack of a better word, macho, right? It's got all of those sort of, but a lot of the subgenres that came later, even though they might have had more aggressive sounds at times, their ideas of masculinity were a little bit more fluid, we'll say. Do you know what I mean? They were, and so I don't know if that ties into what you're saying about all these subgenres, but
I think the subgenres start to develop as a reaction to the other genres that are moving, that are changing. Hair metal comes out, so you need to stay as far away from Motley Crue as possible. Yeah. And the only way you can do that is by liking Pantera. Yeah. Right?
And I can't Pantera I can't get into. Pantera is a band I could never.
I think they're garbage. But I'm using them as an example because they were, when they came out, they were hard, right? They had Cowboys from Hell, and that song in and of itself is this clarion call to say, look who we are. We're not glam metal. We're not a hair band. Yeah. Come listen to us because Metallica just did Enter Sandman, and they're never going to go back to being real men again, in quotes. So these subgenres are constantly evolving because they're a reaction to something, or in some cases where these bands are really good at what they're doing, they want to make what they're doing better, or they want to take it as far as they can. I think Tool, Dream Theater, Fate's Warning, Queensryche, Sabotage, Symphony X, a lot of these prog bands came along because they loved metal, but they loved instrumentation more.
Okay.
And so they wanted to bring their technical precision to the fore.
Yeah.
Even though if you listen to old metal, in order to play that well, that long, that fast, in some of these songs, you have to be technically precise.
No, that's
these
what
guys want to push themselves even more.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, because a lot of the metal that came before was already technically pretty precise. I mean, Judas Priest alone is, it's just incredible. This stuff with Iron Maiden we were talking about, the thrash metal stuff is impossible to play if you don't have. I mean, and again, you can criticize Metallica for some of the performative aspects, but just taken as a whole, you look at bands like Testament and bands like Megadeth, and a lot of the ground that Metallica was exploring. Right. Technically this is a lot of really interesting stuff going on, but it's still crude to an extent. Like there's a big difference. When I hear a prog metal band, I don't just hear a good technical performance. I hear impeccable technical performances.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Right. Absolutely.
And so almost so that somebody who's reared on thrash might be like, this is too clean. Do you know what I mean? Like that's how big of a gap you get in terms of the technical performance. So I think that, but I feel like that's a progression that metal had naturally baked into its DNA, where it was just sort of a constant increase of the technical. Like you start out with these guitarists who barely understand the blues, right? Who are working within that format and within those scale structures to do new and interesting things. And then by the time the 80s roll around, people are using all kinds of crazy music theory to expand the sounds that are possible. That's why Ride the Lightning is so amazing, right? Because they're legitimately, like, I mean, if you listen to like the first Metallica album and compare it to Ride the Lightning, the difference in sound that's been created is stunning. And so
well, a lot of that is probably having a producer and also
absolutely
and improvement in equipment and everything else.
But But also
yeah,
technical understanding how harmonies work and stuff too. Like just
yeah. Look how long it took Dave Mustaine when he made Megadeth. I mean, first of all, I feel Dave Mustaine is the Nikolai Tesla of metal. Sometimes here's a guy that invented the sound for 3 different bands that would go on to be 3 of the big 4.
Mm-hmm. And you're including Slayer in that?
Yeah, Slayer. So Slayer, Megadeth, Metallica, and Anthrax are the big 4. And a lot of people want to say Testament is part of the big 5, but they just didn't make it for some reason.
No, I'll tell you why. I was a Testament fan, and I can say why. Testament they were really good technical performers, but their songs lack the inspiration that Slayer or Metallica or Megadeth had. I've never been able to get that into Anthrax, so I can't quite explain Anthrax's presence on the list. But I mean, you have to acknowledge that that people like Anthrax. Do you know what I mean? So
Anthrax just had 2 they had 2 albums that were just so amazing that no matter what they did after that, nobody cared. Among the Living was just in 1987. It was such a punch in the head when that album came out that nobody had heard anything like that before. They had taken that whole San Francisco thrash sound and put their New York sensibility on it, and I think that's one of the reasons. I can't really say, but if we want to remove Anthrax from the equation, Dave Mustaine made the big 3. His sound and his precision made the big 3, but he's always forgotten. Metallica's name is 99 times the size of Dave Mustaine's name.
Yeah.
Right? When you look at the whole of the genre. And so the work that he's done and had to reinvent all these different times, when he left Metallica, he left them all these songs for Kill 'Em All. And they even used one of his riffs and chord progressions on Ride the Lightning. I don't remember which song.
I think it was on Call of Cthulhu. I think he's credited with that one.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe Trapped Under Ice. I wouldn't be surprised if he had something to do with that as well. And then he has to go and make his own music again from scratch. He makes 3 albums trying to find his sound. He gets to Peace Sells, which is just a masterpiece.
Yeah.
And then there's Rust in Peace, which is even better than Peace Sells. And here's a guy that's having to do all of this while having all these emotional issues, this drug addiction, and being kicked out of the band that he formed. And I understand why he's hated, right? He's got a lot of issues.
Yeah,
go ahead. He's the Dave Arneson of metal, right? Dave Arneson invented role-playing games, but Gary Gygax gets the credit.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of reasons, obviously. Metallica were just more successful in terms of getting an audience. I think also the Metallica sound is maybe more palatable to a lot of people. Mustaine has there's a harshness to Mustaine that is off-putting to your average music listener, and is the thing that metal fans really like about him. And I think he embraces the punk element more than, say, Metallica does. And so you just get that. I mean, again, it's all wrapped in why people don't like him, because his attitude, and he's a difficult guy, and you can hear it in his music that he's bristly, and so that's what makes it have the sound it does. But I don't know. I feel like he's getting his due with the presence of all the YouTube and like just things online being the way they are now. It's not like the consensus is permanent anymore. Do you know what I mean? And so you're very rapidly starting to see a lot of people call into question, Metallica's quality versus Megadeth's quality, because there are people breaking these things down on YouTube and people are being exposed to different points of view on the topic. I don't know if he'll ever get to the level of recognition that Metallica had, because I mean they're just massive. But yeah, I would agree with that assessment, and I think when you include Slayer in him contributing to sound, is that because of the thing you mentioned to me with Kerry King being
Kerry King, Dave Mustaine invents what's called the spider chord. And you can watch how he plays it online. There's some videos on Dave Mustaine's spider chord. Without the spider chord, Metallica can't do what it's doing. Slayer cannot do what it's doing. And there's something I don't really know how to finish this thought. We've been talking a lot. There's just something so important and groundbreaking about doing that. And that's one of those elements that you can say, you have to understand what you were doing before, what metal is, in order to add this element to it. If he was doing K-pop music and tried to add the spider chord, it wouldn't make an ounce of sense. You have to understand the genre you're working in. You have to understand the pieces that you're adding and why you're adding them. And I can see you're on Google searching.
No, I'm trying. I'm trying to make sure I know the actual notes in the spider chord. I'm looking that up. I know the spider chord, but it's so. I only have a ukulele on hand. I don't have a guitar anymore. I sold my guitar about 4 months ago. And so I'm one of these people where I have to pick up the guitar to sort of like I could, I can't just visualize it in my head. So I was looking it up. But no, I think that definitely is a I never, I mean, I always connected him with Metallica. I never connected him with the Slayer sound, but that does make total sense to me. So
yeah.
And I don't know. I feel like with Mustaine, and this is where I want to get back into the open chord. I know we've been going on for a while, so we won't linger on the topic too long.
Still have so much more to do on the next episode.
But you were talking about power chords versus open chords, and
yeah.
Now we have the spider chord, which is the way I think of spider chords. And there are other chords like that in metal, which are just these more grand power chords. Really, like they just sort of add. If you stack more notes onto them, you can create a really powerful sound. And a lot of guitarists do it in different ways. I don't know. How do you think about that topic? How do you think about open chords being used in metal?
Dave Grohl played on the streets here in Seattle last weekend. Not this previous weekend, the weekend before that. He played right down there on the street. And I watched a video of it, and he's on his acoustic, and everybody's standing around. They're all playing. And he played 3 different songs. And I swear to Christ, I cannot tell the difference between any of the open chords he played on any of those songs. He's just strumming the same exact pattern over and over and over again. And open chords to me are they're just filler for a singer to have something to sing over.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that that's a really cynical point of view because there's a lot of people doing open chords well.
Yep.
I love Bob Mould. I love Sugar. I think that they did great jobs with open chords, but and if you go far enough back, you go to Kansas, and you go to a lot of prog band.
Judas Priest uses open chords all the time in their music.
Yeah, well, it depends on the song, but sure. And they use a lot of, and they mix it with power chords. Yeah, they don't just play an open chord because they have 2 really proficient guitar players who know how to layer sound.
Yep.
I think Foo Fighters are a generic rock band. And if Dave hadn't been in Nirvana, nobody would have ever heard of the Foo Fighters. And
I'm not terribly impressed with their sound. If that's,
I think they're just a perfect example. They and Kiss are a perfect example of open chords just run amok with nothing pulling anything together.
Mm-hmm.
I think with open chords, you're just picking. I'm going to play these 4 chords. AC/DC is a perfect example, right? We're going to put these 4 chords together and we're going to write a song. We're going to put these 4 chords together and write a different song. When you're dealing with power chords, you're dealing with a different structure. You have to put together a riff. You have to put together different timing signatures because now you're limiting yourself in what you can do, and you have to make this stronger.
What you're
because you're handicapping it.
What you're kind of saying is it's not as much about just coming up with a simple chord progression. Though there might be a chord progression present through the layering of the different instruments. It's more about coming up with melodic phrasing through the riffs, right? Like, and that's more complex. That leads to a more complex. It's a little bit more classical in its expression because it's not like okay, the Beatles would be a really iconic example of the open chord, right? Like all their songs are, here's like 3 or 4 chords, and here's a song on top of it. And it's a pretty simple method for constructing music, but most metal just isn't built that way. Even when it is, like take a song like "Fade to Black," which let me see if I can. Okay, so I'm gonna do it on ukulele. That's the ukulele. It's out of tune, but those are the 4 chords in "Fade to Black." Actually, just and it's got a 4 chord core to it. But you listen to Fade to Black, and that's not what you remember, right? You don't, you remember that build up in the beginning, and and the sort of the riff on the E chord in the start and the solo, and then that it's got this powerful bridge in the middle. Metal is sort of about you can have chords in it, but it's got to have something else that kind of elevates it up to metal, or you're just basically playing something out of the Beatles. Do you know what I mean? So I think you're right on that. I think there's something there. It's not that open chords are terrible. I mean, like you said, Dave Mustaine does use open chords in some of his music, right? Like,
right.
I think Mary Jane uses a fair amount of open chords, and Hangar 18 is actually, that's all open chords. That intro, that's a D minor riff, and that's what's so amazing about it is people might not quite appreciate this, but you would mention how when Dave Grohl was playing open chords, you couldn't hear anything. And it's because when you add distortion onto open chords, it sounds like noise. It just doesn't sound like anything. And somehow on Hangar 18, they managed to do open chords with distortion, and you can still hear the notes. And
it's so clean.
Yeah.
That intro is so clean. And I used to play it on Guitar Hero all the time. It's one of my favorite songs.
It's really fun, and it's kind of like it's a little bit of a line cliche because he's kind of chromatically going up the neck, but it's I mean I'd have to play it to know if what I said is 100% accurate, but it's a really great chord progression to play. But just that somebody could make that chord progression heavy, to me, is still astounding. It's not easy to do. Because usually when they're doing chord progressions like that, you end up in ballad territory, but I think that the power chords are really the heart of heavy metal. I think without the power chords, you just don't, you don't have it, and I feel like what happens with power chords, and again, I apologize, I have to do it on the ukulele, but you start out with these 2-note power chords, like that, and over time. They start adding octaves, or they start adding the other guitar plays a harmony on top of them, and they just get increasingly more powerful. And so you listen to like a band like Iron Maiden, and some of their power chords are fairly thin by later standards. Do you know what I mean? Like that's why I think when I showed my death metal singer Iron Maiden, even though they had distorted power chords in their songs, and again I chose a very bad song to introduce him to Iron Maiden with. They came across to him as being too light because it didn't have 2 additional notes to it that you would normally hear if you were listening to a death metal song. Because in death metal, they're going to have like an octave, and they're going to have, it's basically going to be 2 power chords stacked on top of each other in death metal.
Right. And Iron Maiden has 3 guitar players now.
Yeah,
so the harmonizing they've got going on is huge.
No, and that's what they're all about. They can effectively they can play a chord between all 3 guitarists, which is actually really amazing. That's and that's a whole other level of harmonic guitar, because usually you can only do 2-part harmonies with 2 guitars unless you're particularly unless they're both playing 2 notes or something. But yeah, no, I love Iron Maiden's new music. I think it's they've kind of moved away from the sound that they had in the 80s. I don't know where I would categorize them anymore in terms of where they fit in the metal genre, but they do a lot of interesting things, and I think that they still feel like a vital band. So
I hated Final Frontier.
Final Frontier was a little hard to listen to. I will agree with that.
A Matter of Life and Death was, I mean, they hadn't done an album that good since Seventh Son, in my opinion.
No, that's the one that I usually go back to and listen. A Matter of Life and Death. Brave New World, I still like to listen to.
Sure, but it's just them making an album.
Yeah.
That was them. We're back together, so let's just make something easy to show that we know what we're doing.
Well, and also it was just the fact that you were hearing Dickinson again on a Maiden album.
Yeah.
And you were hearing Adrian Smith again. Do you know what I mean? The fact that so it was just an Iron Maiden fan's dream. And I like go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think Adrian and Dave Murray, they played so well together. They layered on one another so well that alone would have made Iron Maiden superstars.
Well, go ahead.
even without the rest of it. But that's all I had to say. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I think that they're also a good contrast with each other, and you don't hear it until Adrian Smith departs from the band, but
Yeah.
you kind of need that. Like Dave Murray is one of my favorite guitarists, and he's the style that I tried to emulate when I played. And Adrian
Right.
Smith is a little bit more. And again, it's just my impression from listening to albums. Maybe I've identified people incorrectly, so people could certainly feel free to comment and disagree with me. But I feel like Adrian Smith is a little bit more blues, a little bit more hard rock in his sound. He's heavy, but like he's got like a little bit of a more pentatonic vibe than Dave Murray kind of has. And Dave Murray has a lot of legato, and there's just sort of like a really smooth sound to a lot of his lead playing. And I think when you put those two together, you get a really good hard but melodic sound. And when Adrian Smith goes away, there's a lot of other reasons why No Prayer for the Dying sort of falls for a lot of people. But I think the fact that the two lead guitarists were who had sort of been so in sync with one another were no longer in sync, because now you have this new guitarist that they're sort of fitting into the band, and you can hear like they're not actually playing the notes together anymore. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
they sound like you can hear a little delay between one of the players, and I think it's just because they don't know each other as well anymore. You know, so
Yeah. Somebody once said that your band spends so much time together for so long that your sound develops from the sheer camaraderie of being together in a band in a way that you have a kinship with a bandmate that you can't ever have with anybody else. And so you're always, those two people or those five people are always going to be able to make music together in a way that they can't make if you pick any of them and put them in a supergroup.
It's a bonding experience being in a band. It's definitely a bonding experience. And so, yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that album also kind of created an unfair impression of Janet Gerst, because you hear that and you think, well, he's responsible. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And really, he's just the new guy who's kind of, he needs to bond with the band. And so, now I can appreciate a lot of his playing when I hear him on the newer albums, because especially when I see the songs that he's written and I realize what he's contributed to the band.
Right.
But I think initially I was a little resentful towards him, because, and again, I didn't mind No Prayer for the Dying as much as a lot of people did, but it still is definitely, it's where Iron Maiden starts to. It feels like things are starting to get shaky when you get to No Prayer for the Dying, and it kind of continues through the '90s. But yeah, so I don't know. I think we've covered probably too many topics. We still left out a lot of things, but I
There's
think
so much to talk about, metal. So much.
I wanted to ask if metal is still alive, but I think that's too long of a topic for us to get into.
Well, it's still alive for me. I mean, I'm still going out and looking for bands, and since we recorded the first podcast, I must have listened to about 50 different bands that I'd never heard before. Just looking for new stuff.
I've just been going down rabbit hole after rabbit hole looking for new music, and
there's a lot of bad out there, by the way. It takes a long time to find the stuff that you like, but I think people love what they love, and I don't think it's ever going to die officially. I just think it won't be financially viable.
Yeah, I don't know that it is financially viable at this point or not. I don't know how much these bands are making, but I will say that one thing I forgot about was exactly what you just said. Was there is a lot of trash, and a lot of what we do now, like you only listen to the good stuff from when you were growing up, right? So you only listen to like the Judas Priest and the Iron Maiden, all these things that were great, and you forget about the bands the albums you bought that just were total garbage, and just didn't they maybe at the time sounded close enough to the stuff you were listening to that you would listen to it, but now when you hear it, it just sounds like it doesn't even sound like it's worth wasting any time listening to.
I didn't have the vernacular for it as a child, but I could go to Music Plus up on Whittier Boulevard when I was a kid, and I could just look at an album cover and tell whether or not the album was going to be any good. You had, at a very early, very quick age, you learned, holy crap, that Accept cover looks really bad. I bet those guys suck. And sure enough, Accept sucked. And that happens, especially I think as a child, because you learn so fast.
Yeah.
I think that happens because you already know what your taste is. I really like Judas Priest. I want to listen to stuff that only sounds like Judas Priest.
Well, they had great
or I
album
only like
covers.
Iron Maiden. Or I only like Rush or Triumph or whatever the band is.
Judas Priest probably had the best album covers, in my opinion, because they hold
Yeah.
up over time. They don't look
They
hokey in hindsight, the way that a lot of metal bands sometimes do look. And but I agree with you. I just think sometimes those covers could lead you astray. I thought I knew what albums I would like based on the appearance, but sometimes I would get an album and you know what it was? You wouldn't always be able to identify the subgenre just by the cover. And,
yeah, no, that's very true.
And so sometimes you'd get one and I'd be like, well, I don't know if this is going to be clean vocals or growl vocals or what. You know what I mean? And if I wanted clean, you know, and got growl, I might not be happy. So, you know, there's that part of it too. But yeah, I think we got a lot more to cover next time. I still have like a whole list of questions that we didn't even get to. So, well, I really wanted to. I had a whole question that was dedicated to us bashing Van Halen, and I just wanted to spend 10 or 20 minutes just.
How is it possible for a band to be around that long and have two good songs? How is it possible? I just don't get it. Anybody would have two good songs after that amount of time. But I think I don't think the problem was in the technical side or even in the songwriting side. It was just in the attitude for me for that band. Just felt totally off. Yeah.
But that's
we'll save that for another time.
Yeah. We'll definitely save it for another time. So we will let you go, and we will be back on with another episode, and we'll probably get into a more specific topic next time. We're still sort of covering the what is metal ground, but I don't know. Maybe next episode, if we have residual stuff we need to tackle, we'll get into it. And yeah, so we'll be back on, and until then, we will talk to you later. Just my opinion.